Welcome to the Sazmining Podcast. At Sazmining, we are bringing you into conversations with today's industry leaders in blockchain and cryptocurrency. Our goal with this podcast is to improve the understanding and adoption of blockchain and cryptocurrency by giving you an insider's look at what's being built and informed predictions on what the future holds.
William Szamosszegi is the CEO and founder of Sazmining Inc. All opinions expressed by William or his guests on this podcast are solely their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Sazmining. You should not treat any opinion expressed by William as a specific recommendation to make a particular investment or follow a particular strategy, but only as an expression of his opinion. This podcast is for informational purposes only.
Today's episode is sponsored by BlockFi and Cogent Law Group. Our listeners can visit blockfi.com/sazmining for an exclusive offer for cryptocurrency management, and check out Cogent Law Group for all your legal needs. In today's podcast, you will learn how sidechains work, what a zero-knowledge proof is and how it works, future use cases for blockchain technology, challenges with inflation and traditional monetary systems, the impact of blockchain and cryptocurrency on society, and what life is like on a submarine. Welcome to the podcast, Rolf.
Great to be here, William.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. What you're working on with Horizen is extremely interesting. Can you just talk a little bit about your journey with the company and how you guys got to where you are today?
Sure, yeah. Well, Horizen started out as, this was back in, 2016, and I was doing mining back then, GPU mining, still do a little bit of it now, and finding different things to mine, and ZCash launched. I was like, oh, that's pretty neat, because ZCash was a neat new coin. We could mine it with Equihash, and started mining Z Classic, which was a fork of ZCash. So forks weren't as common back then, and had a great little group of freedom and privacy-minded individuals there on the Rocket Chat. We're like, Z Classic is great. We're doing neat things with it because it's just like Zcash, but there's no corporate overhead. So how do we start improving it? And everybody's like, well, we can't do that. We don't want any organization or anything. So I started talking with like-minded folks and found one of the other fellows on the Rocket Chat, Rob Viglione, and we talked about how we wanted to use cryptocurrency and blockchain to enable privacy and freedom, but we were kind of constricted by Z Classic. And so we said, well, why don't we do something new and different that kind of takes some of our ideas and lets us launch that. So we did that, and we launched, back then it was called ZCash. We launched Horizen in May of 2017, and which is a little over 3 years ago now. So the time's gone by quickly, but that was the genesis of it.
Wow. And so you guys ended up, did you rebrand when you went from Zen to Horizen, or was that just from the start you guys just knew that you were going to take that type of an approach?
We weren't sure that we were going to take that type of approach. We knew that the ticker Zen was kind of cool. Got it on my t-shirt, right? So we started out with ZCash, and we designed it from the get-go to have private and public transactions, as well as having the ability to pay for nodes, kind of like Dash does, and to have a treasury, because we knew we were going to want to improve it and do some things with governance and node tracking and get it to all sorts of different people in the world. We knew we'd need to be able to hire software developers. So that was some of the key things that were in it. And as we continued down the line, we kept getting confused with Zcash. And sure, we had a copy of Zcash is how we started out, but especially in the United Kingdom, where they call Zcash Zcash. So Zcash, ZenCash, it just wasn't working for us. We needed to go a different direction. So we got a branding consultant, because we had some funds in the treasury, and worked through a whole branding exercise and decided that Horizen was a good name that was aspirational enough that we could adopt that as our name.
Yeah, there you go. Well, one of the really impressive things about what you guys have done is you've really starting any type of network just getting past those initial parts of building up the network, getting to a certain scale where you can really start getting adoption and more users on the platform is a challenge for any type of company who's trying to build on blockchain and build using blockchain technology. So can you talk a little bit about those early days and how you really started to scale up the platform and what the vision was moving forward?
Yeah, you have to have some kind of network effect. In order to have a network effect, you need users. And we looked at starting a blockchain fresh from a zero genesis block and bootstrapping, as it were, and getting our users. But one of the developers we worked with said, let's do it as a chain split. I didn't really know what a chain split was now. Most folks know it as a hard fork, like Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, Bitcoin Cash. But this was back before, that was a standard way to launch. So by launching as a chain split or a fork, we immediately had a bunch of people that already own Zen, because it had been all the people that were mining Z Classic. And that was the way to get new users, was to get GPU miners and make it a good cryptocurrency. But of course, as you know, you got to get listed on an exchange. So fortunately, Z Classic was already listed on Bittrex, which, Bittrex has grown into really one of the top exchanges. And it was difficult at the beginning because as soon as we launched, we realized that the transaction replay protection that was supposed to be written into the code expired after a few weeks, which means that if someone withdrew their Zen Cash from Bittrex, they could replay that transaction onto the Z Classic exchange and withdraw the equivalent amount of Z Classic. It was really scary. And so we got on the phone with the folks at Bittrex. Back then, they were a smaller organization. I talked with the owner, and he's like, yeah, we're a bunch of ex-Microsoft security guys. We know how to deal with these kinds of things. We're going to shut down your wallet. We're going to keep the trading open. We were fortunate because my partner in this, Rob Viglione, does a great job at making contacts in the industry. And he had contacted and got to know a guy named Charles Hoskinson, who we met when we went to the May meeting in New York City for crypto. And we met Charles Hoskinson there. And when we had this problem, the issue was neither me or Rob were software developers. We were planning on hiring developers. We figured out we'd have like 3 to 6 months. We didn't realize we'd have a problem right away.
Yeah.
Charles Hoskinson got us one of his team of developers out of Ukraine, and they fixed the transaction replay code, opened up the wallet again on Bittrex, and gave us some breathing room. So wow. Yes, we had users. Yes, we had exchange listing at the beginning, but it was a pretty rough start. We knew we were going to accomplish. We knew we had a path because we had a coin. It was listed. It had good features. We had a plan, and we had funding, but that was all we had at the time. So it was kind of a rough start.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because that just makes me think too. There were so many benefits that you derived from trying to build it off of a fork. I mean, automatically you had the benefit of potentially getting listed on an exchange, or I'm not sure what that whole process was like. And then you also had people who actually knew about your project and were automatic holders. So there's some sort of incentive there for them to buy into that community that you're building. But after you got through that initial stage, I guess at what point did you bring in the funding? And then following that initial stage where you got the code fixed, how did you take those next steps to continue growing the organization?
Yeah, and this applies to lots of small business growth, where you need to grow from having 2 people and an idea into an organization that's able to accomplish things. And one of the things that the famous startup and investor Mark Andreessen talks about is that if you have 3 things, a good product, a good market, or a good team, which one's going to have the most overall impact in the growth of it and success? A lot of people say a good product or a good team, but his point is that it's a good market. If you're in a good market that has a demand, it'll pull a good product and out of a team, and you'll pull a good team together. And at that point, and still, we had a really good market. Cryptocurrency is in the very small stages, and it's rapidly growing. And people who get a feel for it and see what it can do and be like, they're converted. And so by having a good market and having funding. We didn't have to do sales because at that point it was 8% of the new Zen that was mined would go to our treasury, which we're then able to turn around with. But we had to build a team. And the first thing we had to do was hire software developers. We started with contracting. And then over the next few years, we hired a team and kind of carved our own path. And a couple of years ago, Rob came with this idea that we needed to do something different and unique to really establish our place in the crypto universe. And so we took our software development team and pointed them towards doing that, doing minor updates all along, but focusing on this big project, which is now in testnet. The code is public, and we're looking at going live on mainnet in first quarter next year.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And when you're talking about that main differentiation, or what you're trying to solidify is what sets your protocol apart from others out there, what is it really that that you guys do differently?
Yeah, it involves in scaling and being able to do other applications than just sending transactions. So we started with a good base, which is built on Bitcoin blockchain type technology with the ability to do private transactions like ZCash. The issue that we started noticing, because we wanted people to use our cryptocurrency. So we would pay people to operate nodes. And now, for example, we have a faucet that is used a lot by people to get new introduction to cryptocurrency. The problem is scaling, to be able to get a lot of transactions onto that blockchain where the copy is maintained by everybody. Bitcoin solves that issue by having very small blocks and using second layers, centralized exchanges, decentralized exchanges, Lightning, all sorts of different things but even so, if you want to run a Bitcoin full node, I think you have to have 500 gig hard drives or something like that. Ethereum works to scale theirs, and you have to have a pretty sizable node. So the differentiating thing was we talked about doing sidechains. And sidechains is basically creating and running your own blockchain, but that's tied to an existing cryptocurrency. So there's an ability to safely transfer funds from the main chain to the side chain, and the side chain can use that currency as the coin of the realm in the side chain, and then to safely transfer it back. And being able to safely transfer it there and back without the ability to have any collusion or decentralization was one of the key things that was designed into the main idea of side chains, but nobody had ever accomplished it before, and we've accomplished it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what you guys did to solve that problem, unlike Bitcoin or Ethereum, you built into the protocol these side chains that would allow people to transact with privacy. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
So the side chains can do anything because the uniqueness is in what's called the forward and backward pegs. So imagine that you created a side chain, you send funds to a side chain, and then you accept funds back. But all of a sudden you're getting more funds back from the side chain than was ever sent there in the first place. That's kind of a problem.
Yeah.
The other problem is all the other sidechain designs that have been launched out there require a trusted set of certifiers to say, yes, this transaction is allowed to go back to the main chain. So our lead software architect, because one of the things we've been able to accomplish over the last few years is to build a strong software development team that has project managers and architects and cryptographers and front-end developers, back-end developers. The idea that he came up with was based upon the zero-knowledge proof technology that ZCash has pioneered. And so the idea of zero-knowledge proofs can be encompassed to other things as well. One of the things that ZCash designed into was having a small character field, kind of like the memo field on a check is the way that they like to describe it. So you could send private messages and everybody would have to keep a copy of it. The issue is that these zero knowledge proofs that are on the blockchain, they're pretty big. They're bigger than an unshielded transaction output, a UTXO. So it causes the blockchain to grow rapidly. And that's nice. It's also focused in the realm of finance. So the idea of zero knowledge proofs, though, is very important because you want to be able to send information to other people and not necessarily have the whole world be able to read it or understand what it is. So we took that idea of zero knowledge proofs, and I'm not going to claim credit for this. I'm not the architect or software developer. I just explain it to people. But designed something called a recursive zero knowledge proof and used that to create the IOU, basically, to the sidechain. And then that zero knowledge proof IOU is used to return funds back to the main chain.
Thinking about how that can be applied, that's one of the things that I think is very valuable that a zero knowledge proof has that many other types of protocols don't have, and it's just that privacy.
It could be as simple as just doing business in the business world. So say you wanted to pay your employees and suppliers in Bitcoin. Okay, great. I'm going to start paying all my employees in Bitcoin. All right, so someone can figure out, hey, I'm getting a paycheck from this wallet. I wonder what other transactions are being sent from this wallet. Say, well, it's a 50-person company. Look, there's 50 other transactions, and here's what the amount is. They can start figuring out what all their fellow employees are getting paid because they're using Bitcoin, and it's a blockchain where everything. So imagine being able then paying your employees in ZCash or Zen, private transactions. Nobody can see how much everybody else is getting paid. Or you're paying your suppliers, or your customers are paying you, and your competitors can all of a sudden see everything that's getting paid. So you don't, even at a basic level of doing business, you don't necessarily want other people to see what the value and amount and frequency of the transactions are.
I'm really interested to hear what the current landscape looks like today, and I mean, how many of these applications are truly being built, what are some of the challenges that you're facing, and just really see kind of where we stand.
Yeah, no, and it takes a while to build something. So you remember the
Definitely.
ICO boom that we had in 2017? Well, some of those organizations, they got funds, they got investment, and then they hired a team, and they've been building. And so it takes time to build something. And I think that's part of why we have a crypto price cycle. So people see some things happening that folks have been working on for a few years. They get very excited about it, and then other people project to where it's going to be. Then folks come into the market and say, that's what we're doing right now? We're replacing governments with blockchain? Woohoo!
Yeah.
No, we're not doing that. We can possibly do that in the future, or maybe there's parts of the world where the government's not as strong, or there's parts of the world where the money's not as good, or if we're setting up a new virtual nation online and we want to have governance in that. These are the things that can be applied to, but a lot of folks just ignore that and say, we're replacing governments, blockchain's the future, I got to buy. Then you get people that come in and say, well, I want to start mining, right? I need to buy 1,000 miners, and I need to start mining next week. And I'm sure you've probably had conversations with people like that, and you're like, well, let's talk about that.
Yeah, when everyone's buying miners, that's probably a sign that it might not be the best time to buy miners.
Right.
Especially if the manufacturers are on back order for months on end, then you got to kind of expect that the cost of that equipment is a little bit inflated.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And GPU miners are really happy mining Ethereum right now because of all those fees on DeFi. So like you said, maybe when miners are really expensive, you shouldn't be buying them. Maybe you should buy them when they're inexpensive.
Yeah.
And have a longer term outlook on what you want to accomplish.
Having ASICs on a network is actually very beneficial because over time that just protects you from being a target of these 51% attacks.
Well, I mean, there's so many different factors that go into it. So I'm not certain about that. I think that's a valid way of looking at it. Especially when there's a lot of just general purpose GPU hash power. I mean, NiceHash has done a good job with their operating system where you plug that into your GPU miners and they'll switch to mining whatever it is that their demand has.
Yeah.
So I think the economic incentives, if you spend $1,000 to $2,000 on a Equihash miner, or you buy 10 of them or 100 of them or 1,000 of them, why would you want to attack the cryptocurrencies that you're able to mine? That just decreases their value. So I think that's a valid argument.
Yeah, I think it makes sense as well. I mean, that's one of the things that people especially in the Bitcoin community and in the mining community, they'll talk about, well, how secure is Bitcoin? And that's one of the risks that sometimes when people are afraid to jump into Bitcoin, they're afraid they attack the security aspect and say, well, what if a 51% attack happens? And I mean, if you think about it, just having all those ASICs, having all that hash power on the network, it does insulate Bitcoin to a certain degree. I mean, in terms of the actual amount of computational resources being put towards any network, Bitcoin is far and above all the other networks that are currently out there. And I think that that's one of the things that makes it so resilient. And over time, you kind of have to get through those growing pains and be able to be insulated from a sort of 51% attack. So it's great that you guys are making that move towards becoming a more resilient network. And you definitely have had some of those initial scares, but you've made it through.
Yeah, we have. And fortunately, our chief architect, he came up with an idea that prevented made it much more expensive to do a 51% attack. And we implemented that into our code. Building
an organization, there are many steps to it, and it's definitely very challenging. It seems like right now, a lot of these companies surrounding zero knowledge proofs, they're currently in that building stage. They're trying to build software, trying to increase adoption. Where do you think the industry is going to be in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think it'll kind of people get pushed into it. So the folks that are building the software and the systems, and you mentioned there's a lot of miners out there. I think the amount of electric power used by Bitcoin miners now is on the order of the output of 10 Hoover dams or something like that. It's a lot. So there's a lot of energy and ideas and people that are putting these systems in place. And some folks have studied history and looked in the past to see what kind of crazy things people can do to each other or how they organize or types of systems. So I think a lot of the systems are being built, but then these days, it seems there's either large organizations or governments that do things that push people in a direction. So I read recently that the IRS was considering taxing everybody on their cryptocurrency holdings. So you would have to report all your cryptocurrency holdings and then get taxed on it. Well, to me, that's a push. That's a push in everybody wanting privacy on every cryptocurrency right now, right? So, if that happens, all of a sudden there's going to be a large focus on privacy cryptocurrencies. Then there's going to be a huge focus on what Ethereum's doing with decentralized finance. You can get on Uniswap and you can trade for something wrapped in Ethereum or whatever. You don't need anybody's permission. So back to the original design of Bitcoin is being able to transact without having anybody's permission to do so. That's a very powerful idea. And with centralized exchanges having to go through know your customer, anti-money laundering, all sorts of other things. I mean, I'm not legally allowed to get onto Binance, right? So I'm just not allowed to because I'm part of the U.S. government tax regime, and I can't do it. And so there's a lot of opportunities that I don't have because of that. And so that's frustrating. I'm sure there's people in the United States that are frustrated by that as well. But if you start looking at governments pushing people or trying to take things from them and putting them into permissioned environments, you're going to see people doing other things focused on privacy. So what I think the DeFi revolution, whatever you want to call it, is happening in Ethereum right now is, first, there's a lot of people that like to gamble on things. It seems like there's a lot of gambling going on there. But the other thing is they're doing it without permission and they're rapidly writing code. And some of this, in this explosion of people writing code and creating things, they're coming up with some good ideas on how to do governance, how to do other things like that. And so we're at Horizen, we're talking and saying, well, what is it that really excites people about that? And I still get back to is being able to accomplish something that you own without anybody's permission.
Yeah.
And so we're like, well, we're working towards that with the side chains, right? Because we could have a rapid payment side chain. It could be like a little Venmo app side chain where you just quickly and it transacts it. Okay, cool. You could have a messaging. all of a sudden you can have all these different capabilities in different languages as their base language. So I think the United States might not be the first place where a lot of the crypto adoption happens. I think it might be in countries that don't have such strong governments.
Yeah, I mean, talking about governments in this type of a context is really, it's really interesting, because they're going to be the governments that push away from it, and then there are going to be other governments that are going to be more all right with people transacting, and the government being more hands off with it. And I mean, just taking all that into account, do you think that these different governments are just going to take different stances, and users are going to continue to use these privacy coins because of just the ethos behind it?
Yeah, it's tough, and it's not any one thing that's going to happen in one place and one time, certainly. I mean, it also goes to the fundamental idea of, are we owned by our governments and have to do what the people in the government say, or are they actually there to serve what we want? And
it's very interesting. Yeah, I never thought about it that way.
So just because the government says you have to do something, do you have to do it? No. I mean, I got 4 kids, and I'm like, there's so many rules that everybody says that you have to follow. And especially when you're a teenager, there's all these different rules. There's rules at school, the community, at home, church, wherever you go, people are putting their rules on you. And sometimes they conflict. And different, we get that at the federal, state, and local level too. And family rules and different things like that. So I had to give them an order of prioritization for rules. Like, you come up with your own personal rules first. Those are highest priority. Then it's family, then it's community, then it's other folks, then it's governments like that. And if there's ever a conflict, you go to the higher order rule and you follow that one. That might cause conflicts and consequences, but here's the thing. When you break a rule, first someone has to catch you. Then there has to be a penalty, and then they have to enforce the penalty. So there's a progression, and had the ability, when I owned a business, to work with attorneys quite a bit. And they always talk about, it's not like there's a rule and you have to follow it, or there's no rule and you don't have to follow it. Even when you build your own organization, you build rules into your organization. And those might, those are different rules, but those take a higher priority. Of course, your organization, if you're an employee, could ask you to do something that doesn't meet your moral rules. And at that point, you should not do it, or you should quit, or you should do other things.
That actually outlines it really well. Just taking a step back, going back to what you said, thinking how difficult it was for us to even track how much ZCash was being mined. I mean, having the government track that, it would take a lot of man hours and a lot of understanding of just the technology available to even get a ballpark answer on how much was actually mined.
Fortunately, the tools are better these days, but I can't even imagine anybody trying to, if they're in a regulatory environment where they need to pay taxes on their capital gains, people in the DeFi space right now, working out how to pay taxes on what they make. I mean, the volatility is so crazy, and if you buy if you get yourself a bunch of sushi, right, and then try to pull it back out, and you're able to successfully do that, and you got it in Ethereum, and then you want to convert it to your local currency of choice. I mean, there's so many different steps there. Are you supposed to be taxed on all those transactions? It's unclear. And so when things get too difficult, a lot of people will just throw their hands up and say, I'm not doing it.
Just the fact that when you mine it, you have to record the price of what it is when you mined it, and then track the differences in between what happened by the point where you mine that Bitcoin and by the point you sell that Bitcoin. It's a way of tracking that's just so difficult and onerous on the people who are mining, and you really need to buy, like, we use specialized software that allows us to report it in the right way, but it's something that is very difficult, and unless you spend a lot of time setting up those accounting processes, it's almost impossible to do if you don't have an organization around you that's actually building that out, and having people do that as a full-time position.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why, if anybody's thinking of mining, need to engage a consultant that can set them up with these types of things when they first start mining, so that a year or two later they're like, oh, this is easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Thankfully, the resources out there are getting better, and it's becoming more manageable.
Yeah. No, but if it gets too bad, maybe like you said, maybe people stop doing mining in the United States and they move on. But it does seem like there are enough good people in the different bureaucracies that try to help people get to where they're going, and it seems like there's sensible rules that are being made out there. So it's not all doom and gloom. I don't want to paint it that way, but I do think that there's outside forces and events that can cause cryptocurrency to be adopted quickly. And one of those, like we see it in Venezuela right now, and I know we've talked about Venezuela for years, everybody has, about crypto adoption, but if you look at the stats, there's so much transactions happening on localbitcoins.com because people are actually starting, I believe, to use Bitcoin for transactions there, as far as I can tell from reading, from not being there.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where if you think about it, it's almost like every single time hyperinflation or a currency gets devalued, one of these catastrophic events happens, it's like a huge marketing campaign in a way for the adoption of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or any type of non-fiat currency. I mean, the people in Venezuela, they went and they learned about Bitcoin, and now you're seeing higher transaction volumes because they experienced firsthand what can happen in a fiat currency if your government isn't able to manage monetary policy properly. And I mean, especially with the turbulent times we're living in today and the amount of money that the Fed is printing, it makes you wonder, when are people truly going to decide to take their fate into their own hands and start doing the research and buy into some type of digital asset to try and protect their wealth?
I think people are wising up to it. I mean, the internet, being able to learn information, anytime about anything, is one of the most powerful forces to be able to give people the ability to live the lives that they want. That it is really going to take off.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's one of those things too that it seems like every single day that so much is happening because we're within like this industry and reading about the news, what's happening in the blockchain and cryptocurrency industry. But the vast majority of the world is unaware of all of these things that we're talking about, and we got very technical with some of the things in this podcast, but just understanding the basics behind Bitcoin and monetary policy and all these other functions, that it still makes me feel like we're very, very early in where this is really going.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I like to be part of, is those different technology trends as they go through the S curves from, the initial slow and then the rapid adoption, and then the other part of it. It's fun being part of those technologies or areas because it's growing so fast. People are joining it, and it's fun. And there's a lot of different opportunity in this space. So it's not all about necessarily payments or private payments or investing. There's been, I think, financial aspect of cryptocurrencies has been a big target, just because banks are such a centralized institution, and they've been taking advantage of their position. And like you said, the Fed printing money and other things like that, where it's just people are having to work harder and harder, and they get less and less. Their paycheck pays for less and less. But back to what we're doing at Horizen, that's why we're so excited about sidechains, because building purpose-specific apps on blockchain systems, and businesses are doing that with Hyperledger, which are not really blockchain systems; they're more like the shared distributed ledger systems. But still, there's a lot of opportunities to be able to use systems where a lot of people contribute to the information, a lot of people read the information, and then they do it in a effective, efficient, and orderly way. And I think that aspect of blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies is mostly unexplored still, and is really going to take off. miners provide a really valuable service to the cryptocurrency. And there's the whole discussion about, is proof of stake going to be more important than proof of work? And EOS has their distributed proof of stake, Cardano's got proof of stake, Ethereum is moving towards proof of stake. But I also like to see what's worked for the longest period of time. And what's worked for the longest period of time, granted that cryptocurrency hasn't been around for a long time in its current incarnation, but the previous versions, they failed. Bitcoin is the first one that has worked for the longest period of time, and it's based on proof of work with mining. So there's got to be something about that part of it that makes it successful.
Yeah, and I think it is in part due to the fact that you're tying this digital asset to real world hard assets, and there are true costs involved with building facilities or your shipping container designs, purchasing this equipment. You're providing the service to the network, helping with decentralization as well. And then there's the actual electricity, and miners are essentially creating work or creating Bitcoin by the work that they're doing, almost turning electricity into Bitcoin through the system of mining. And it gives a base layer of demand for the Bitcoin network as well as decentralization, which I think is extremely important. And one of the reasons why you've seen this staying power within Bitcoin, granted, I think that one of the biggest stress tests in recent years for Bitcoin was that liquidity crisis in March with the market. Bitcoin fell by over 50% in a day, but you still have the baseline holders, you have the baseline miners who are going to continuously be there to support demand within the network. And I think that that's really useful for allowing Bitcoin to continue to scale over time.
Yeah, I think so too. The mining machines are going to keep getting more efficient, but I think Bitcoin miners, like you said, with containers, are able to find low-cost power that's not currently utilized and use that to add to the overall system. And so I think it's going to be around for a while. Now, I do think what's exciting is the ability to have people organize in different ways. So the base way of organizing has been, in your community with your geographic presence and your nation and things like that. But with the internet, and especially with so many people being pushed to work from home, a lot of people are getting familiar with video technology. And that's one of the cool things about working with Horizen is we organize on Discord. We have our meetings there. We have the different channels twice a week. We all get together on a call and talk about what's going on. And this is an international group of people. They're all over the place. There's very few people that are in the same city. We've gotten a group of programmers together in Milan, but it's people from all over the place. And I think that and it helps when you pay folks in Zen that you don't have to transact through the banking system and wire funds all over that way. You can just pay people however you want to pay them internationally. So I think that's like the glimmering of the beginning of the way that people are going to organize in the future. So instead of organizing into cities, counties, or states, or companies or things like that, maybe people start organizing around like-minded folks that have a common interest or have a common goal, and that becomes their community, and they transact within that community. They make agreements within that community, and it's one that's all over the world. So we need the tools to be able to do that a little bit more easily. I don't think Facebook quite meets the capabilities for doing something like that. But if you are going to organize, these virtual nations, I don't even know what you'd call them. But I think the blockchain technology and cryptocurrency can play a big part in helping that to happen.
I'd like to thank BlockFi for sponsoring today's episode. BlockFi provides wealth management products for crypto investors. I personally hold my crypto with BlockFi because they pay me up to 6.2% interest annually on all of my crypto holdings. At Sazmining, we've hooked up all of our listeners with a special sign-up bonus. All you have to do is go to blockfi.com/Sazmining and sign up. Again, visit blockfi.com/sazmining for an exclusive bonus offer. It's a no-brainer to earn additional interest with BlockFi. Today's episode is also made possible by Cogent Law Group. Finding reliable legal representation in blockchain is one of the biggest challenges when building a business. You need to make sure that you work with a law firm that understands the legal frameworks that apply to the industry and has the ability to strategically help you grow your business. When researching law firms for Sazmining, I found that Cogent Law Group checked all of the boxes. Not only do their lawyers have expert level experience, but they also understand the blockchain industry. Cogent Law Group gives you access to high-end lawyers without breaking the bank. Have you been following what's happening in VR at all? Or because I haven't followed it that closely, but I was talking with someone the other day on the podcast and they knew a lot about VR, and it was just the first time I'd been hearing a lot of the things that are actually being built, and it's pretty incredible. Like I kind of started diving down the rabbit hole with them, and it opens up so many doors and changes a lot of things if VR really starts to get going.
You know, I've gotten my input that from my son, who's got his VR headset and he plays video games on it all the time, and of course from reading science fiction books that project things out into the future, and talk about and try to imagine how people would interact in those different types of environments. But from your conversation with that guy, what was one of the most interesting things that you learned?
Well, the last time I'd used a VR headset, it was just very basic. I was trying to play a game. You clearly knew that you were wearing a headset because of where the screen ended, and then the graphics, it was not nearly as detailed as you would want them to be if you're really trying to get to that next level of VR, for example. So I thought it was obviously very impressive technology, but I thought it was extremely limited. Then he started telling me about how VR is going to start going from the point where I could clearly tell I was wearing a headset to expanding the screen. So when you're wearing it, you don't necessarily have any type of visual cues that are telling you that you're wearing a headset. And then also just being able to look around, having the processing just get better and the rendering getting better to the point where things get more and more detailed.
I think AR, augmented reality, is going to have its own application as well. Think back to a couple of the science fiction books I read on that, one by Daniel Suarez. One of them was Damon, one was Freedom. But basically, they rebuild a whole society there, and the people that are in the new society wear these glasses that overlays information about everybody that they see around them. Sure, you see basic things like their name, but you can see their affiliation, their accomplishments. For people that aren't in the system, you can see their entire financial history. I mean, you got all these back-end servers that are like aggregating information and posting it into this augmented reality system.
You were on a submarine for a number of years.
Yeah.
Just very random, but can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure. Yeah, there's not a lot of people that have done that.
Yeah, I don't think I've spoken to anyone who's done that. So I just wanted to make sure that we touched on that before I forgot.
Sure. Yeah, no, I was an officer of the Navy on a U.S. Submarine, and went through the whole Naval Academy, nuclear training, stuff like that, and was stationed in Hawaii, in Pearl Harbor, on a fast attack submarine. This was in the early 90s. And the U.S. Navy has two basic types of submarines. One carries the nuclear missiles, and the job is to go to sea for 72 days and not be found. And the other is a more general purpose submarine. We call them the fast attack. The British call them hunter killers, and go out there and track other ships, stop into places, go stick up an antenna and listen to folks. Just in general, just go around and do stuff. And so we'd go away from Hawaii for 6 months and go all over the Pacific. Sometimes we'd stop into a port. Had the opportunity to stop into Brisbane, Australia, and Fiji, and Japan a couple times, and so that was neat. But it is definitely a different way of life. I mean, it's 120, back then it was just men, 120 guys, and you're living in a 30-foot diameter steel tube underwater, and
Oh
with a
my
nuclear
God.
power plant, and that's the way of life. And so I joke, I'm like, yeah, I slept 30 feet away from a nuclear power plant for 4 years. um, and when I was in Hawaii and I was not on the submarine, it was a lot of fun. And then people ask me, they're like, is there anything you ever miss about it? I'm like, well, a lot of time it was difficult. It was dangerous. We'd always have to practice for if there's flooding or fire or a nuclear accident or, a close aboard explosion or things like that. And so we got trained up in doing all those things. But there is one thing that I kind of missed. And that was all the people that were on the submarine. They were really well trained. Everybody knew what the mission was, to go out to sea and do this and this and this. So everybody was kind of going in the same direction. And you didn't really have any options to go in a different direction. It's not like you just leave. There were some people that worked harder and some people that didn't work as hard. But in general, the folks on there, everyone, officer enlisted, was pretty smart, and they knew what they were doing. And it was a very results-oriented organization. So maybe I'll poke fun at the Air Force or Army people, but if you're on land and you're, sometimes, I have a nephew that's in the Army, and literally one of the things he had to do was go paint rocks white on the Army base. I mean, just to me, that's a ridiculous sounding thing. We didn't do that kind of stuff on submarines because there was never enough time, and there was all this, electronic and mechanical machinery around, and we had missions that we had to accomplish. And so accomplishing things was the important thing. So yeah, it was a different way of life because we go just underwater for a month or two at a time and work on, recycled air and eat canned food. And
oh my God. I mean, just hearing you talk through it sounds unbelievable. I mean, it's the way that I'm envisioning this is just you guys all being super well disciplined but extremely busy on this submarine. Like, what was the day-to-day life like when you were there? Like, what types of things were you doing? Was it very schedule oriented where you were doing the similar type of thing day to day for the entire month you might be down there, or was it just very, I guess, fluid and no day was like the day
very
before?
Very schedule oriented. So the way the Navy does things is with watches. And back then we had a 6-hour watch. So I would go be the officer in charge of the nuclear power plant for 6 hours straight and sit in a room with 3 enlisted guys, and we'd watch the control panels of the nuclear reactor, the electrical plant, the steam plant. And normally nothing would change unless we were practicing a problem. Then all sorts of things would change. And as I got a little more experience, I moved up front and would be navigating the submarine around underwater. So I'd have the 6 hours of watch, and then I'd have 6 hours where I had to learn things and follow up on the guys that were working for me and stuff like that. And then and I was fortunate because I was one of the junior officers. The enlisted guys, they would have, instead of having 6 hours of watch every 24 hours, they'd have 6 hours of watch every 18 hours. They'd have to go do their job on watch where you can't leave for 6 hours. Then they'd have to go do their regular work, and then they'd have to, eat and sleep in the next 6 hours, and then be back on watch. And we didn't have enough space, so for each 3 enlisted guys, they shared 2 bunks. So there was always somebody on watch. So
yeah,
there was always a place for them to sleep, but. So it was very disciplined. And after I was on the submarine for a while, I would get the midnight to 6 a.m. watch, which was great until we started our regular day when the captain liked to have drills. So we'd spend, starting at like 9 a.m., we'd have, close aboard explosion or enemy submarine or flooding or things like that. Everybody would have to be up and doing stuff. So I got really good at taking naps.
Yeah. Oh, were you on like the warrior diet or something where you're eating like one time a day?
I tried to eat as much. And the food on submarines is actually pretty good because they bake fresh bread, and they do what they can with the canned food and stuff like that. So sometimes though, I'd be just so tired that I'd skip a meal for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, that's fascinating. I'm really glad that I remembered to ask that. This has been so much fun hearing about everything obviously you're working on within the industry, but just all the other things we talked about. Really appreciate everything that you do for the industry as well. What you're building is amazing, and I think that you're really one of the pioneers that's moving forward with one of the most interesting projects that I've spoken with about someone on this podcast. So thanks again for everything you do, and thanks again for coming on the podcast.
I really appreciate it, William. Thanks. And thanks for all the work that y'all do of getting the word out and helping people and promoting these topics. So this was a lot of fun to talk with you.
Yeah, of course. Is there anywhere online that people can connect with you or connect with the company?
So can certainly go to Horizen.io, but it's not Horizen O-N, it's Horizen with Z-E-N at the end. And that's a great place to start. We've got a very active Discord and Telegram. Every Thursday, we have our team meeting, and that gets live streamed on YouTube. So we've got a really good YouTube channel. And if you're at all interested, if anybody's interested in learning how to develop their own sidechain software, we're putting out video series on that. The second one was just launched on YouTube today. And we're having, because we're going after developers now, because we want developers to develop their own sidechain. And so, come to watch some of these videos and join up for our Horizen developer environment and other things like that. So yeah, there's a lot for people to find out of every type of thing, and it all starts at Horizen.io.
All right, perfect. Everyone go check out Horizen, zen.io. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sazmining Podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media and YouTube for the latest updates and previews of upcoming episodes. Full episodes and transcripts can be found on sazmining.com every Thursday. If you want to hear us interview a particular guest on a future episode, please reach out to us at podcast@sazmining.com.